Okay, hey, hi everyone. And we are on our last reading group session for Mark Fisher's works. We've actually gone through all of his works published in his lifetime. So this is the second reading of Weird and the Eerie and the last of our readings of Capitalist Realism, Ghost of My Life, and now the Weird and the Eerie. So we basically talk about the books we've been reading and we make memes for each session, and then we show each other our memes and we talk about what we've been thinking about. So yeah, I mean, it's the end of several months of these sessions actually, so some kind of moment of reflection on Fisher's work, and by now I think we can probably look back at it and maybe draw a kind of line of themes through his work, which I'm sure we'll do as we go through. But I'm just going to basically go straight into it, as I think the viewers understand the routine by now. We're with Adam, my co-host for the Acid Left, Chris Meadows, and Ernesto Vargas. Okay, I'm just going to open a meme. Okay, so this is actually my first meme, and I think it's from the intro of the book, or rather of this half of the book. So the book's in two halves: the Weird and the Eerie. So we talked about the Weird section last session, and this is the Eerie session. So Fisher just recaps on the Weird and the Eerie as two different concepts. The weird being a kind of excess of something, or something behaving obscenely or not as it should, and the eerie being, as it says here, something that occurs either when there is something present where there should be nothing, or there is nothing present when there should be something. There's a slight error here. I've written is twice. Okay, but anyway, it's either when there is something present where there should be nothing, or there is nothing present when there should be something. So there's that kind of spooky feeling when there's a presence there, basically, or there's nothing when you would expect a presence there. And this is where Fisher gets into talking about how this all links to his kind of main themes, his main political themes, as outlined in Capitalist Realism and touched upon at various points in Ghost of My Life. So basically, we were talking last time about how does this relate to capitalism, basically to politics. And it becomes much more explicit in the second half of the Weird and the Eerie. And basically, this is it. There's a kind of a sensation of things either appearing or kind of appearing to have disappeared, or acting in ways that they shouldn't. So you get the sensation of objects acting with an agency where we're not acting with an agency because they are. So this kind of compares to capitalism, because a lot of Marx's analysis of the commodity revolves around the idea of commodities having properties which kind of go beyond human agency, that serve to affect human agency. So we put certain properties onto objects, and we believe that they will somehow change our lives in certain ways, and then we become kind of objects to those kind of objects with agency. So we end up kind of being enslaved by objects that is kind of single commodities, but also capitalism as a kind of wider object and economic machine. So this is kind of where this link becomes quite clear between the Weird and the Eerie and capitalism. And I've actually got here, just to explain the meme, a image of some Gucci virtual trainers. So I actually bought the app, or you can download the Gucci app for free, but then you can pay, it's something like $12 to have these AI trainers, which you can basically point your camera on your phone at your feet, and the trainers look like they're on your foot. So it's something there that shouldn't be there. So it's kind of a bit like wearing a trainer generally. When you get a trainer, and it really is one of the best examples of a commodity, because you really feel, it gives you something extra. You're kind of a bit more cool with your new trainers. It's a bit like that with these Gucci trainers, but they're not there. So I think it's almost doubled, at the least doubled, this thing of like, hey, I'm wearing these trainers. They're not just trainers. They're not just shoes. They're something more than just shoes. So you imagine this with a pair of Nike Air Jordans, for example. The whole thing is kids pay ridiculous amounts of money because it's not just a shoe, that somehow it makes them more desirable, more well, I suppose desirable is a word, but I don't mean necessarily sexually, because I think these things work at a younger age. Often you're more cool among your peers. And, this kind of works also when you're an adult, I suppose. But the thing is, it's not there. The thing that the coolness which you have from the trainer is not there. It's a property we put onto the trainer. So this is exactly how a commodity fetish works. Okay. As Marx describes in the beginning of the first volume of Capital. But I think when even the shoe isn't there, this thing kind of is accentuated. So you're kind of stuck in a mental loop of, you have this cool thing that isn't there. So you're like, I'm cool, I've got the cool trainer, but I don't actually have the trainer. But I kind of have it because it's on my foot, because I can see it on my foot. So you get this kind of circle, which kind of, again accentuates the cycle you have in your head when you have a trainer, which is like, you're wearing a real trainer that makes you cool, but you're like, but actually it doesn't actually make me cool. I think it makes me cool. So you get caught in this kind of weird cycle of like, it's only a trainer, but it's not only a trainer because it's a Nike Air Jordan. And then all these other kind of cultural kind of references linked to that, being a specific shoe. Anyway, so that's one meme I did, wearing and not wearing my Gucci shoe. And this is where we can get real haters from our community, because we get haters just for talking about crypto coins. But the point is that I'm not buying the Gucci shoe because I like Gucci, or I'm buying it because I'm trying to make a point about the Gucci shoe. So this is another one with the same shoe. And basically it says, capital is at every level an eerie entity, conjured up out of nothing. Capital nevertheless exerts more influence than any allegedly substantial entity. So capital money is like the ultimate commodity. It's a commodity in itself that we give the value of value. We give this kind of fake value of being worth something, and then use that capital to buy other things that we give other fake values to, such as trainers can make you more cool. So it's a similar point again. And I think this, just reflecting on Fisher's work before I pass on to the rest of you, this kind of expresses a lot what Fisher's talking about throughout his work. So there's a definite kind of line running through it, as I suggested earlier. So, I mean, he kind of talks about this later on in the book when he talks about agency in the computer in Kubrick's 2001. Is it called HAL? Things having agency, appearing, doing stuff that shouldn't be. So like the computer on board the spaceship in 2001 Space Odyssey, which is there to help humans on their space mission, but then suddenly it starts doing weird shit and turning against them. So this space film becomes basically a horror film. Or these kind of weird witchy women in the film Don't Look Now, which is a great film, basically set in Venice, and this couple go to Venice and they kind of restart their life having lost their young daughter, and then they meet this kind of old couple of women who have this kind of who apparently have this sixth sense, and the women kind of suggest that they can see their daughter, and the guy starts getting spooked by these women, and then he starts seeing this kind of evil dwarf everywhere. Anyway, there's an agency in the film, it's a property which acts a bit like capitalism. So Mark Fisher is saying there's this property, capitalism, which is similar to something spooking us. And in capitalist realism, he talks about how the way to kind of break the power of this agency of capital, of things which have this hold over us, which appears to be unbreakable, is to kind of like create ruptures through creativity, and to utilize the depression or psychosis created by the fact that capital has trapped us, to use that to create kind of weird and unusual creative cultural moments that can somehow expose flaws in capitalism. So I think in a way that's what's being suggested again in The Weird and the Eerie. It's like there's something weird about capital, and the only way we're going to take that on is by out-weirding that. And he does talk about, at some point, he talks about, well, I'll leave that to you, because actually in the kind of pre-broadcast conversation, I think you guys had to maybe handle on this more. But anyway, let's just say that, there's a kind of aspect to Fisher's writing which is difficult, and I've written this at the end of some notes, so I'm going to go through this. There's an aspect which is difficult, which is that he's talking a lot about mental illness, and at several points in The Ghost of My Life and Weird and the Eerie, he mentions suicide, and you kind of feel a little bit like there's a guy who's dealing with his depression through writing, trying to write his way out of it, and proposing maybe there is, some form of escape from capital, while very clearly saying capital is responsible for the depression, and particularly because of the way that it kind of like turns the tables on humans and makes it as if we are kind of slave to the capitalist economic system where it should be working for us. There's something disturbing in the way that he proposed all these ways out, and then he committed suicide. And this comes up at different points. I suppose the kind of the thing that is disturbing is particularly that the depression arises from capitalism, manifesting as a lack of agency. And then you see him like approaching more and more a kind of weirdness, a hauntedness, something that is moving a bit away from capitalism as we understand it in materialist sense. And then one can only really imagine that with the weird and the eerie, he maybe was having some kind of effects of depression or whatever other mental illnesses he may have had. He may have been on other spectrums. That he was encountering effects which actually brought on a full sense of the eerie, the weird. It wasn't just like, hey, that's a bit weird. I don't think he's writing a whole book called The Weird and the Eerie just because he kind of finds it interesting that things can be weird or eerie. I think that was a genuine effect of his depression, and for him, an effect of capitalism, that the capitalism caused the depression, which then brought about moments that were kind of disturbing, like something that was kind of acting, a feeling that elements of existence, objective existence, were acting in ways that they shouldn't have been. They were frightening, for example. There was a sense of excess accompanying certain objects, and the capitalist system itself, or there's a sense of absence, things that weren't there that should have been there, or things that were there that shouldn't, things that were there that shouldn't have been. So a kind of, things being animated by a spirit. So what does one do with all this stuff? I don't know, because, it's the guy that kind of, at the moment, most speaks to people about how somebody is suffering the kind of, from the worst excesses of capitalism, suffering emotionally, how they might get around that. And it does point for a lot of people, and you see this sometimes in the sarcasm of memes around Fisher, it does point to there really being no alternative, which is of course what Fisher said. In capitalism there is no alternative, but I think what he's really saying in the book, and I think the option still exists, is that if the problem with capitalism is that it appears to act without agency, therefore there can be no end to it, and we don't know also what new kind of excesses, what new kind of sadistic properties it's going to come up with, because we already can't control it. So it's an unknown quantity. It's just going to keep kind of rebuilding, but also getting more obscene, which it has certainly in the last few years. The thing is that if that is the case, that capitalism kind of exerts itself through this appearing to come out of nowhere, through being beyond our control, then the way around that is going to have to be to ourselves produce something that appears to buck the trend, that appears to be beyond physical laws, particularly the law of capital, that there's not no way out. The way out is to seize upon the existence of the weird and the eerie, i.e. that is something that is beyond explanation, that's irrational, and use the fact of the existence of the irrational to believe in the possibility of superseding capitalism. Okay, so it's a bit like, I take your 20, I raise you 40. It's a bit like playing cards. It's a bit like playing poker. That you go, okay, well, capitalism's going to do that. We don't know where it's coming from or what it's going to do next. So we're going to do this, so we're going to come back at you with something perhaps more absurd or more irrational. But when I say irrational, I don't mean to completely do away with rationality. I think that I kind of mean that you have to fit in with a new rationality. So you're kind of looking at capitalism with a heightened sense of the bizarre and the macabre and the weird and the eerie. And you're going, that being the case, that being what we're dealing with, I then throw back this at you. And that's only really possible if you've seen the weird and the eerie. So I don't think going to this place where Fisher's gone and dealing with his need to write about the weird and the eerie because he's experienced the weird and the eerie should leave us feeling depressed. Because in a way, I think he's only able to say that that we need to kind of like use our neuroses, depression, psychoses, etc., to develop creative forms that kind of throw capitalism off balance. He's only able to say that because of where he's been mentally. And I think, not everyone goes where Fisher goes. I mean, there's different examples through history. Walter Benjamin, unfortunately, committed suicide. Adorno lived to 63, I think. And he just died of a heart attack, which, is not good either. But, we all have, everyone's going to have a different experience. We can grasp what Fisher grasped and make that useful. So that's just what I was thinking. And that's my final word on Fisher and the 3 books we read.
So, sorry. From my understanding, Mike, and maybe this is what you're saying already, is that the Gucci trainers themselves wouldn't be eerie, because the eeriness is marked by absence as opposed to weirdness, which is marked by presence. But and because a lot of this has to do with subjectivity and states of mental, your mental capacities, is if you have these Gucci trainers and you think of yourself as having them, and then you look down and they aren't there, but you still feel the cool effects of them being there, like your confidence is boosted or whatever, you think you got it, but because they're not actually there, looking down and seeing the non-existent chains on your feet would produce an eerie sensation.
I mean, I think that's one way, yeah. But I don't know if he's exactly mapping on the experience of the eerie to the experience of capital. I don't know if it's more by way of analogy.
Well, I wasn't comparing it to capital there.
Okay, you're referring it more to the way to experience of wearing the shoes, yeah.
Yeah, just like how the Gucci trainers themselves could produce an eerie experience. It wouldn't be from them themselves. It would be that interaction between you believing that you had them, yet when you look down at your feet, you're not actually wearing them, even though you own them. And if you look through your app, they would be there, and you experience like the presence of them in some kind of capacity. But maybe I'm off here.
I think
yeah, go on.
There's definitely something there, because I mean, the eerie isn't just marked by the absence of presence. He also says that the eerie can be marked by the presence of something there that shouldn't be. So I think those are 2 modes of the eerie, right? He talks about 2 modes of the eerie, but that's really captured well, I think, by the virtual Gucci shoe, because if you on one mode you have something there that shouldn't be there through the virtual augmented reality aspect of it, but it's also marked by an absence because you look there and because of your own subjectivity and your own understanding of how technology works that they're not actually there. So you have two modes of the Eerie operating in that experience.
Okay, yeah, it does. It works both ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like one of my memes kind of refers to that a little bit, where he talks about kind of the tragedy of materialism is that to embrace materialism at all, you have to embrace a dualism. Yeah, it's the other one that kind of points to it. Yeah, because there's I feel like there's something there, and I'm intuiting, and I might be wrong here, but something there about there's a dualism present in that experience of the Eerie. So quote is, the condition of materialists such as Parkin, our condition, in other words, is of knowing that all subjectivity is reducible to matter, that no subjectivity can survive the death of the body, but of nevertheless being unable to experience oneself as mere matter. Once the body is recognized as a substrate precondition of experience, then one is immediately compelled to accept this phenomenological dualism, precisely because experience and its substrate can be separated. There are ghosts in the machine, and we are they, and they are we. That resonates with that experience of two modes of the Eerie via the Gucci shoe to me. And in the background here, you have this picture. I love this picture so much. I see an immense beauty in it, but and it's kind of, I made it a bit transparent, but essentially what it is like it's a dead raccoon skeleton, and its hand seems to be gripping like a bouquet of cordyceps mushrooms. So, there's something of a flow there, I think, of, I think a lot of our anxieties about the modern era and these kind of dissolving subjectivities that are getting really weird and kind of unpredictable because of the advent of capitalism. There's a possible positive move there to me because of the concept of jouissance. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but we take a certain pleasure in watching things dissolve. So we could, we could harvest a hope from this. Maybe it opens up a space for new subjectivities, or subjectivities that are less rigid and a little bit more like water, and that can shift and form according to how we need them as weapons against capitalism. So I think that I didn't feel super depressed reading this book. Ghosts of My Life, I definitely did. Like, I felt the heaviness, but there's more of a fascination to it. Like it was very engaging, and I didn't feel so heavy reading it. Yeah,
I think Mike's definitely right that I myself struggle with depression and stuff, and having those experiences can lead to eerie or a weird feeling depending on the type and what exact experience is. But I do think also that the weird and the eerie is something that anyone can experience, and probably does more often than not. But as Mark suggests in one of the essays, that we kind of edit those out to keep smooth functioning, because that's like because the weird and the eerie draw attention to the outside, we kind of edit them away from our own personal stories to keep a coherent identity, because the outside questions our identity, especially as it's been established up to that point. But Ernesto, I think has some stuff.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Adam, if you don't feel if it's the opposite, that rather we draw the weird and the eerie into our narratives to make sense of them. Because my impression, as someone outside of the Imperial Core, reading Fisher's reflections, is that he, through his analysis, he kind of fails. he personally doesn't because he's well read, right, and everything. But he's kind of illustrating the failure of of a rationalistic cognitive mapping, right? We were talking earlier about how capital is this irrational entity, right? And I think that what we might want to conclude, especially after this reading, is not whether it's rational or not, but rather that it is so widespread globally and so multifaceted, and it draws different faces for different crowds, that we each kind of have our own experience with it and naturalize it, right? I can tell you that the face of capital in Mexico is very different to the face of capital in the United States, or in Brazil, or in Uruguay, or in the United Kingdom. And what I feel that these texts kind of draw out is this investigation beyond those faces, right? Kind of, especially when he talks about shipping yards and ruins and abandoned buildings and so on. It's not that it's not that these places don't exist anymore; they just don't exist there, right? When he talks about dockyards manned by actual people, those places are still in some places in the third world. For example, in Mexico, they are much more rare. When he talks about shipping yards, there are shipping yards here in Mexico, but they aren't as advanced as the ones I've seen in Ireland or the ones I've seen in London. But if you go to Guatemala, they're further back in the past. You know what I mean? So what I drew here, and I brought into a lot of my memes, is this kind of a comparison between the illusions that capital kind of invites us into, and which we accept very readily, and the ones that we I sent them to you over email, Mike.
Yeah, I do have them. I do have.
Oh, yeah?
them. Yep.
Oh, great. Okay, so for example, this one's the one about and I added a little bit of a Bitcoin jab here too, because I know we're big fans of that. Heavy material infrastructure facilitates the illusion, and here's my point, right? The illusion of a dematerialized capitalism. It's not that it's actually dematerialized, but it is so advanced that it feels dematerialized, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you guys have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I definitely feel like capitalism is a process of abstraction. So if you stretch that out over time, it's going to appear more and more like airy and less dense or whatever. So I definitely agree with that notion that we still can, and I think he was trying to do this with the acid communism thing, is we still can map the topology of capitalism, but we have to adopt different subjectivities to accomplish that. The ones that kind of dominated the industrial age don't work so well anymore, and we see that at play across the world, right? Or at least, especially in the West. Obviously, I'm going to interpret things in a Eurocentric way because I'm in an imperial country, But yeah, definitely agree with that. That there doesn't need to be this acceptance that it's this eerie entity that we can't like map or move against, It's not the same feeling as capitalist realism was. And I don't think that he was necessarily even adopting capitalist realism himself. It was more like a diagnosis of the Western mind, So a lot of people interpret him as being like, kind of like, oh, we can't do anything, boo-hoo, but I don't think that was his voice across his writings, if you take all of them into account at all. He's not Nick Land. He didn't accept this like this weird like eldritch horror determinism of capitalism is this thing that we can never like map out or touch or move against because it's all powerful and all pervasive.
I think that he's really a lot like Adorno in that he's trying to locate the kind of response to capital from within capital, because it's like the minute we just go, hey, we can change this over optimistically, then we fall right back into the trap. So the question becomes, how can we come at this utilizing the problem of capital itself? So I think that's why he's kind of like looking to combat capitalism from within the depression caused by it, Because at any point you think, hey, I've got the answer, the chances that you've somehow been co-opted, that your positivity is a sign that you're no longer being critical enough. So, one always has to kind of try and come at it from within its kind of worst aspects. So I'm just thinking about this weird and eerie, as someone suggested a minute ago or a few minutes ago, being just quite a human experience in any case. And I think it is a human experience regardless of capitalism. I think the problem is that humans always have to deal with the existence of the weird and the eerie, which are basically just reactions to the existence of nature outside ourselves, basically of the object as such. And there are ways of doing this. I don't really know much about non-capitalist cultures, to be honest, or even non-Christian cultures, but just thinking about shamanic practices, for example, or some art performances, the kind of process of trying to kind of make a pact with nature rather than trying to dominate it. These kind of processes exist in spiritual forms, and I think through art, through the process of kind of trying to mold materials with your hands, for example. So you have to kind of come to an agreement with the materials. This is not what capitalism does at all. The problem is that capitalism kind of tries to separate us out from nature to then completely dominate nature, missing the fact that that's always going to be nature acting. That us separating ourselves from nature to dominate nature is actually just nature dominating an aspect of nature, which ends up being us as well as the environment. So what Fish is really reacting to is, yes, the weird and the eerie, but I guess trying to overcome the weird and the eerie as it's being co-opted by capitalism, or what it becomes in a capitalist society.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, they were just some thoughts because someone had mentioned earlier that the weird and the eerie is not just something capitalist, and I think that's right. And
actually, Mike, now that you brought it up, there's a part that really made me think of dialectic enlightenment, my heretical reading of it, and that's, he says, the mythic, the virtual infrastructure that makes human as such possible. It is not the case that, first of all, human beings, and mythic arrives afterwards as a kind of cultural priest added to the biological ones. Humans are from the start, or before the start, before the birth of the individual, enmeshed in a mythic structure. And I think that kind of speaks to what you just said about us trying to dominate nature, not realizing that is in itself an expression of nature, and the way that it works.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird, but frankly, I rarely read anything that Fisher's writing. I mean, when he becomes systemic and when he starts to kind of discuss, what capitalism is and what we should do about it, but also like all the kind of build up he does to that in terms of the kind of co-optation of nature and how nature behaves in a capitalist society, or rather the kind of disjunction between us and nature and the effects that creates. I never read that without thinking about Adorno. I think he's so indebted to Adorno. I mean, of course, he could be coming up with the same conclusions just because, they are the conclusions maybe that intelligent people come to when they're dealing with these materials. I'm not saying he's copying Adorno, but then, of course, I mean, he was influenced by him. I mean, he would have admitted that.
Agreed. Yeah, I mean, there's something to be said for like embracing the positive aspect of design consciousness that humans bring to the table. You have a good example of that in the ecology of like a permaculture in a territory that has established a permaculture loop. So you establish these positive feedback loops that wouldn't have existed without the presence of the human. And now I'm seeing things come out in some scientific journals about that they really believe that like the Amazon isn't necessarily just the wildness of nature expressing itself, that the indigenous people who existed in that area for all this time contributed heavily to those positive feedback loops that produce sustenance, And the idea of a permaculture setup is higher productivity with less work. So it's very resonant with, the kind of post-work aesthetic or whatever, and there's a sustainability to that feedback loop as well. It's not destructive. So that we definitely have a model for design consciousness being applied positively. And to me, that's what, Marx was trying to map out via society and economy and markets and trade and all of this, that we can apply design consciousness in a positive way.
I think that's absolutely right. We need those positive feedback systems. Sometimes like permaculture stuff gets written off by Marxist leftists as being like hippie or anarchist or primitive, like kind of return to the earth thing. But I don't know, that to me fits very much with like a acid communist or even like a solar punk type of vision of the future of building like a collective reality that does nourish not only but something bigger than people for the express purpose of easing life for us and like making it more powerful. I don't know if you want to get more into your meme.
Oh yeah. I'll hop over to that. And I just want to say real quick that there's some awesome pages that are like politicizing permaculture that I follow on Facebook. And I think that's really, not that that's not to say permaculture is the answer, but there's a great model there for the possibilities of human potential, as applied to complex systems, using our systems thinking in this way that makes life better for everybody. Okay. This one, I kind of riffed off of my mention of that movie, The Fountain. And this picture is a scene from that where he's approaching the tree of life, he's the backstory for that is that he's, kind of this conquistador figure in service of the queen, and they're looking for Eden, basically, following the Christian mythos. And, he reaches it. And I talked last time about how so there's two different lifetimes. It's like this reincarnation cycle in the movie where he lives two different lives, and it's him and his lover, and in this iteration, that's the queen. And the way the climax of this lifetime is basically that he approaches the tree of life, has this like dagger type thing where he's trying to drink the sap of eternal life that's supposed to make him immortal. And really it does, but not in the way he expected. You see this greenery and this beautiful flower imagery that's kind of grotesque initially. It's a really shocking image, but it ends with him being kind of assimilated into this like, tree of life system, which to me kind of, there's something resonant about that, about the unity with nature rather than trying to dominate it, but the quote here is, the symbolic structures which made sense of the monuments have rotted away. And he's referring to like Stonehenge there. And in a sense, what we witness here is the unintelligibility and the inscrutability of the real itself. So I don't have time to be a Lacanian really, it take years of study to really grasp like what he's mapping out there, I think. And I've tried a bit, but this really jumped out at me, as this what we perceive as like this kind of alarming state of subjectivities that are harder and harder to latch onto. Maybe that's just the expression of the real. We're approaching the desert of the real, and we have to do that if we're going to work through capitalism, and shift things in a better direction. So you have to wander through the desert of the real to have any hope for that.
I think something in that scene with the phone too that is touched on in a couple, like especially in Ghost of My Life in this book, which is like, you know, he wishes for immortality, and the kind of implication there is that he will live forever. But immortality itself, like what it changes him into, this like, you know, nature plants thing, tree with the tree of life, is not him. And it, like that goes back to what I was saying earlier about the way that we edit stuff out to have an identity, to like truly have immortality. You couldn't really be human anymore, or not in the same sense. So it is a real outside of how we normally think of things.
Yeah, we rely on the gaps in our memory to constitute our identity, right? He talks about that. And Ernesto referred to that as like a Freudian concept that, you know, our perception of ourselves and our own subjectivity is kind of constituted by gaps rather than, I mean, I guess the information present in our subjectivity contributes to it too. But, you know, there's that interaction between those two that we never have like a clear picture. There's never like a solid subjectivity. It's always built by gaps and misinterpretations, I guess, you know, just the nature of semiotics, you know, when you try and communicate with other beings that are able to communicate via language.
Oh, there's a video. Yep.
I do have a little video. This is my attempt at what might be called a slow meme. At least to force the viewer to slow down if they want to actually engage.
I have a little issue opening that up. I'll try again. Now it's working. Can you hear that? Can you hear the soundtrack?
Yeah,
I can.
Okay, good.
So that's that. And that's right by that part that just quoted, you know, when he's talking about the eeriness of Stonehenge or Easter Island, and he says there that the eeriness comes not from like how these people disappeared. I mean, it's easy to imagine how populations disappear, etc. But like that we don't actually know about the people that created these. So it kind of leaves this ability to imagine something maybe far greater than they actually were. Like, you know, it just becomes a mystery that we don't even know who those people are. And then once after experiencing that, you kind of see your own world as possible sets of traces. You can imagine, like, you know, an alien finding this land, or you in the future, someone in the future exploring what we have contemporary life, you know, cast away, and the not knowing who humans were kind of changes the way you can look at stuff, and you can experience this yourself. This last one shows. I mean, it's weird. It seems to be a subway middle of the woods, which is probably just a subway sign that someone took and put on a cabin. But still, if you were to experience this, if you're walking in the woods and you come across this, it would produce a very eerie feeling, as if this subway existed so long ago that it's since been abandoned and a whole forest has grown up around it. And you would wonder, what could have done this? Like, why was this here? You know, it's not in a city, etc. So it makes you question the very surroundings that you're in a sense that you think something might be at play than what you're expected or used to.
Yeah, we avoid thinking of the material relations, right?
Yeah, kind of the nature of the commodity, right, is just to be perceived as like the standalone object at least the logic of capital is like, this is just a thing that you can buy, you know. Most people aren't thinking about like the set of human interactions and however much history and violence and, you know, all these possibly horrible things that went into making that aren't considered, you know. So it's already decontextualized, you know. But it's weird that we don't perceive that as eerie, because to me that's eerie. That, you know, you could say that's a bit eerie that we're just looking at something and not considering how it got there, you know. So
well, I think that's the point, is that we normally don't. We take things for granted, and the eerie forces us to kind of recognize that there is other stuff there. So like by experiencing that absence, you kind of notice, you know, in the other stuff, in the real world or whatever, you start to think about that stuff. You start to think, oh, well, just like that subway I found in the middle of the woods, this too had by someone, yet I just took it for granted that it was going to be here. And like it's that change your outlook on civilization that produced like that strange sensation.
Yeah, I think there's this is interesting. It's made me think that I think whilst we exaggerate what might have gone on in Stonehenge, for example, you know, which was presumably a kind of a banal spiritual ritual in its own time. Or, you know, there are many stone circles, you know, I guess this is just how they worshipped, and to them it's just, you know, it's just what they did. You know, there may have been kind of some more exuberant or more far out rituals held in these places at times, but I think that all the same, we might exaggerate in our minds what went on there, but not nearly as much as they would exaggerate what we're up to if people from that time could see what we're doing now. Can you imagine the magical properties they would project onto us?
Yeah.
You know, what's really happening in the Subway sandwiches or anywhere. Or especially if you have like the Burger King and you have like the machine now where you go in and press pictures.
All right. Yeah.
There's definitely something weird about their bread.
But this kind of fits into this kind of way that we do, in a sense, conjure this stuff. You know, in a sense, other people looking at us would think, you know, they're conjuring this stuff somehow. It's a bit like, I don't know exactly who said this now. It was an anthropologist, and I think Derrida referred to it. This case on, let's just say it's an island. American forces went there. It was a remote island with a very small population. I think it was in the Caribbean, perhaps not that remote, but anyway, there was a small population of people who basically lived, to our minds, primitive lifestyles. And they saw that the American soldiers had these planes that would arrive, and the planes would arrive full of stocks like food, whatever, clothing, weapons, etc. And what they did is that they built a very primitive runway next to the American runway, because they thought, you have a runway, you build this runway, and then gods arrive and they give you stuff. So they built a runway, but not like with tarmac, but with like sticks in the form of a road, making a long kind of pathway, just, you know, looking much like the runway. So, you know, I think in a way, of course, it was their mistake to think that the Americans were summoning the gods. But in a way, maybe it's our mistake to think that we're not, or rather it's just a different language. And, you know, if we are conjuring these forces that, you know, create Subway sandwiches or whatever, then we could conjure other things. This is the thing. You know, if it can be thus, I don't even know what the word thus means. I sound like Shakespeare. If it can be thus, it can be otherwise. You know, if it can be like this, it can be some other way. And that, in a way, is, I think, what Fisher was getting at.
I think that's right. And that's like the core message, I think, of the book. That exactly there. And what you're referring to is the cargo cults. They're really
okay.
interesting, and they've actually happened in several locations too. With varying ways that they approach the subject. But yeah, trying to get the gods to come back, deliver free stuff.
Didn't one group of soldiers or Air Force actually send a plane onto their runway in one of these cases?
Oh, that I don't know. That would be interesting.
That
I
would
know
be a
one of them,
nice story. Yeah.
Prince Philip, and they were very sad when he died. They thought he was actually a god. Still, it's hard to imagine for me, just looking at him.
Yeah, no, exactly. And then that's how
the specter of the God King. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's the kind of thing. If you can conjure one god, why not another? Or if you can put those properties onto one person, why not another person? But this is how things can be so unfair. But then you ask this about success as well. Why this person, not that person? Things are so arbitrary, and that gets more bizarre with like Insta fame and stuff. Well, I think the arbitrariness of capital is one of the worst things. I mean, it's like almost worse than. It's almost worse having this thing of like anyone could potentially become famous, and many more people than before could potentially become famous, but it's random. Is almost worse than what we had before, which is very few people can become famous. But there's very specific steps you can take to be one of those people.
Yeah, that's big amongst the youths right now, So like, I want to make a YouTube channel and monetize it. Like, I hear that all the time from parents. Like, oh, that's what they're really into right now, and it's like that's the trend. It's the new. I want to be a rock star, but no, I just want to be like a YouTube personality that got famous for like
kind of incredible. Yeah, but the thing is, it's like where they could well monetize their channels and make money more than me or you could.
Mm-hmm.
If you're talking about people who have kids and they say, their kids now are all into making YouTube channels and monetizing them. I mean, that's great for them, but then you think, well, they could well do that. They could well succeed, but I probably couldn't. I don't know if me and Adam are really trying to monetize anything. I mean, we kind of, I think it might accidentally happen, but I mean, this is kind of interesting. I mean, it does fit into, rather than just us ranting about why we're not making any money, it's kind of these old boomers and why these kids are more likely to make money. It does fit in because it's it's kind of like things appearing that shouldn't appear or not appearing that should appear. It's just like this arbitrary nature of capital, which there's nothing fun about arbitrariness. Think about the arbitrary system of discipline. Things like there was this kid, maybe he was a young man, I guess, who happens to be, I think, the son of Roger Waters, one of the guys from Pink Floyd, who swung on a flag on the cenotaph. The cenotaph is just like this monument, I guess, war monument near Parliament, I think a bit near Downing Street where the Prime Minister lives. And during an anti-war protest, this guy, who happened to be the son of someone from Pink Floyd, swung on the flag of the cenotaph, and that was seen to be disrespectful, so he was put in prison. But it was just such like it's not like you have to go to prison because you swing on a flag. But they could do it, and they wanted to discourage people from protesting. And I think that protest turned violent. But you see these things one time. There was a kid who threw a fire extinguisher off a roof of a building during a protest. Didn't hurt anyone, but he got something like 8 years because they could do it. And it's like, this is, I was thinking about this. I was talking to someone about China the other day. It's like China actually is incredible if you go there, how free people are. They're always speaking about the government. They really can, one can speak about, criticize the government in China, even in, advertised groups of people having talks. But it's like, if you get to a point of really threatening the government, you might actually be able to like challenge their power, that they will act. Although occasionally there are these kind of arbitrary actions, like imprisoning the jailing the bookshop owners in Hong Kong who held books, anti-mainland China books. And then that's when it becomes terrifying, because it's like, you don't know. I think an arbitrary system of law is more frightening than one where you just know what would lead to you going into prison. But this came up because I was speaking about China, but then I reflected to this person I was speaking about that the same thing actually happens in Britain and America.
Yeah,
I imagine Mexico.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, here there's an arbitrariness, for example, in protests, right? You can have very, very, very vibrant protests in the streets, right? Which are, I think Fisher's even commented on how ineffective, just protesting on the street is. But if you try to, I don't know, go to the south of Mexico, where actual capital aggression is happening against agricultural, lands and stuff like that. If you protest, you get killed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in America, I think there's been some like frightening movements against protests that get slapped under the banner of Antifa or whatever. I've been to some of these, and it's it's like 20 people, but they've got a line of like 60 riot cops with full gear waiting. It's like they're without even any danger of it, like, or sign of it becoming a threat to the state's power whatsoever. It's just like this opportunity to waste and display force.
I'm actually kind of reminded by the way that the U.S. will present stuff in ways where they'll be like, well, in Russia, you can be tried for heresy, and that's a terrible thing. But like the way Mike was saying about the flag, that's not that dissimilar. A lot of ways, it's probably fairly enforced. Not everyone who technically commits heresy in Russia is tried for it. Other countries. And just to that, I know someone. Excuse me. No, I muted myself. I know someone whose brother in Canada actually chained something to a fence during a G20 protest and got 20 years in for or 20 years in prison for attempting to destroy a federal building or something like that. They basically said by chaining something to it that they had weakened the infrastructure because the fence later fell down, and they charged him with that. And it's like, I mean, that's to me quite crazy, and it seems arbitrary and vindictive, and definitely meant to set that line and to scare people.
Yeah, where it's not even rooted in a logic anymore. It's not even objective. You're just like inventing this possibility that the kind of Minority Report vibe of like pre-crime or whatever. Like, this might possibly have led to someone being inspired to do something else, even in the expansion of that. All these laws getting passed in different states about protecting people who run over protesters, basically. And making that ambiguous, like being prosecuted for that, yeah. I don't know.
I have this meme up here is mine. This is a still from the movie Stalker, which Fisher spoke about very briefly in Ghost of My Life and speaks a little bit more about in The Weird and the Eerie. And it says, humble in the face of the unknown, yet dedicated to exploring the outside, the Stalker offers a kind of ethics of the eerie. And I thought that was a really good and interesting way to approach the film. The Stalker is the character standing farther away on the right side of the frame, and he brings people into the zone, which has been abandoned after some kind of meteor crash years ago, and weird stuff happens there. Physics aren't the same, so it's an eerie space. And he tries to help people navigate the zone for a price, because in the zone there's a thing called the room, and when you get the room, it will grant your deepest desire. And it's really, I love the way the film works, because he tells this cautionary tale once they're like deep within the zone, about a former stalker that he knew that trained him, that he made the room. And his brother had died not long ago, and when he got to the room, room gave him was a bunch of money. And then I'm pretty sure in the film what ends up happening is he gets depressed and kills himself. I'm almost positive about that. It's been a minute since I've watched it. But what Fisher notes there is that, like, so the room, by granting desires, your deepest desires unknown to the individual, maybe, it's also a judgment upon the person. You know, like, he got so sad and upset because he wanted to believe his deepest desire was to get his brother back, who he missed so much. Yet the room read that even more he would like security and to be free of material want. So it gives him money or whatever. And the stalker throughout the whole film is warning the other two characters constantly, telling them to stop. No, we have to do this ritual. No, we have to listen. I got a feeling we have to go this way. He approaches Zone in the room with respect for the outside, for the weirdness, and really said, like, embodies this element of you have to respect mystery. You're not gonna make this bow to you. You are nothing in the face of it. And like, I think that's something that's also a theme throughout the Eerie section of the book. And I think maybe that's why he says capital is eerie as well. Because if we look at capital in a true way, if we look at what is going on, it becomes apparent that we don't have agency over capital in that same sense. And so, like, not to try to fuck with it in that way, you know, to actually respect the power of something outside is a kind of ethics of how to operate within an eerie space and with mysteries and forces greater than your own individual agency. And then finally, to bring that to back to Ghost of My Life, which was that part about the noumena that he talks about, where he like says that grace requires an acceptance of our own nothingness. I think that goes hand in hand. It's like, in order to have grace, you have to accept your own nothingness and the power of something that could offer grace. So in order to have agency, perhaps you have to accept that there are things with more agency or with greater power that affect you in ways that are almost impossible for you to understand. And it's only through knowing that you can actually act with agency. You have to be able to recognize the things that control, shape, and form human, individual, and societal consciousness. That's my reading of it anyways.
Yeah, I think that we might try to capture the feelings of weirdness and eeriness and try to master them in a way that is counterproductive. I'll give a more mundane example, you know, taking it away from all of this supernatural, just thinking about misperceptions, right? Because in the end, right, the point of this phenomenon is that we are because so Fisher says that it's something where there is nothing or nothing where there is something, right? But the very whole in perception is ours too, right? Like, we are creating that gap and we're filling it with eeriness, with weirdness, whatever, right? And what I think that this meme especially highlights, and through the Stalker's ethics, right, is this understanding, right, that all of these phenomenon are without us, you know, are out of our control, but at the same time there is a lot that we can learn from them, right? If we are humble enough to reflect, and instead of taking the impressions for granted, we might discover, you know, a new kind of path forward. This one's from the chapter about Margaret Atwood, right? Where we're talking about this story and film, I think, or this story about some rocks, right? Where these people go and then they lose themselves and so on. And they're reflecting on some text from Gilles Deleuze and Felix Guattari, where they say in 1,000 Plateaus that they think I should be filled with death. I should be in mourning. But nothing has died. Everything is alive. Everything is waiting to become alive. And in the background, I made a collage between two murals by Diego Rivera, one of them in Mexico and another in the United States. And well, if you guys are familiar with Rivera, he was one of the forefront artists of the muralista movement, the muralists, and he was a socialist. A lot of Mexicans in that time were socialists, and he did very explicit artwork which featured Lenin, Marx, Trotsky, because he was friends with Trotsky, his wife Frida, and in general the proletarian movement. And in this case, here you have a collage between one about colonial Mexico, where Hispanic people, pre-Hispanic people, I'm sorry, are put in chains and driven and so on. And the other is about the industrial developments in Mexico, which I talk about this a lot more in the Sunday things with Zero Books, but with Conrad. But what I'm getting at here is that Mexico has a very varied history, and there is a lot of tragedy, right? We just like with the example of Stonehenge, we had multiple cultures. We had empires even, right? Imagine a Native American empire. We had an Aztec empire, which was completely obliterated. And it wasn't actually obliterated by the Hispanics, by the conquistadors or anything, but by itself. By itself, and it's just like Rome fell in its time because it sustained itself on an unsustainable model of slavery and colonialism. Well, not colonialism, but actually, a small-scale imperialism and so on. The same thing happened here in Mexico, and while there is a lot in the past that we can rescue. I'm sorry. What we really need to focus on is on a sober view of how things were before. You don't find many Mexicans who are like Europeans in the sense of this whole Deus Vult, we were kings, we were Vikings stuff, right? Because our culture is it's personally, I think that we have constantly kept reading back into our history, and even lately there's a philosopher from the past century called Jose Vasconcelos, right? And he was kind of a fascist sympathizer. So we won't, but much like this other guy, the Nazi philosopher. Heidegger, right. So he was a controversial figure and so on. But he has this idea of a cosmic race. That's how he called the Hispanic race in general. He thought that the melting pool, I don't know, the mixing whatever, the mixture of races that was happening in Latin America was there was no step back from it. Right? That was the ultimate, so to speak, race of the human race, and that there are no actual races, beyond a human. Right, race. He, of course, localized it in Latin America, and he had a bit of a Latin American superiority and so on. Like, I don't want to go into that regard, but what I want to rescue from his point is that he tried to look at all of the death and all of the terror and all of the history and actualize it, right? Bring it back, and this meme is kind of that, right? We have a vast Marxist history, which with a lot of martyrs and a lot of victims and a lot of death and a lot of terror, and it's not about mourning it or celebrating it, but about living with it.
Yeah, allowing the dead to speak. I think if you want to put it in a kind of an eerie metaphor.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, we speak for them, just to be clear, right? Because we don't want to give them some kind of a agency beyond their matter. But yeah, giving them words, giving their words back, maybe. And the last meme is just I don't know, Mike. Sorry, Adam. What do you want to say?
Oh, very quickly, it just reminded me of this one line. I had to find it. It's the point is not to quickly resolve this enigma, but to keep faith with the question that it poses. It reminded me of what you just said at the end there.
Yeah, and this one is just a very short reflection on the same point. What is called organic life is actually kind of folding of the inorganic. This is again this is in line with Fisher's Lacanian sources. But what he's talking about, of course, is that there is no actual, self-agency and so on. We are just matter, and we have to recognize. And it's a small criticism of Fisher here, but at some point in when he's talking about death drive, I feel that he concludes that Freud kind of separates death drive and eros, and that's fair. But I mean, he's bringing Lacan into the equation. So something that we might want to keep in mind is that in the end, all drives are one drive, and eros, the life drive or the pleasure principle, is a reaction, so to speak, against the death drive. But the death drive, as Fisher says, and actually accurately, it's not a drive towards death, but a drive of death, right? It's just matter driving itself. And sadly, it's, at least in my opinion, it's beyond our understanding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, things have to die to continue feedback loops in a system. We all become compost, and we're terrified of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. You thinking something, Adam? Seem deep in reflection.
I'm thinking, I don't know if you were asking Adam actually, but yeah, I'm still thinking.
Ernesto, could you maybe give us just a little bit more death drive? I always thought my understanding of the death drive is it had something to do with like persisting past death as well, but this might be Zizek's influence on him. Maybe he's very rare as a very
persisting past death. Did you say?
Yeah.
It's a cancellation of death. That's what it is, really. It's kind of a trying to return to a time before death. But of course, what actually ends up happening is that we do it through death, because there is no before death, actually, right? I mean, some people might believe that, right? Whatever. But at least in the psychoanalytic sense, there is no actual before death, and our only vehicle to it is death itself. So
I kind of took it to be, sorry, because you're the expert, but agreeing with that it's like, well, if you can't have life, if you must die, then the people kind of throw everything up in the air voluntarily. It's like a kind of going along with the natural order.
It's an enjoyment of going along with it, which is the especially macabre thing here.
Yeah, I certainly get that with smoking when I used to smoke tobacco, like cigarettes daily. They're kind of doing it because you knew it was bad for you. I think maybe one gets that feeling more as a teenager and into their 20s.
Yeah, but it's not a suicidal feeling, right?
It's no, it's certainly not a suicidal. It's kind of the opposite. Yeah, you're right. That's probably a good illustration of what you were just saying, actually. Yeah, that you really feel it's like an excess of life. It's a celebration of life and death, in a way.
Yeah, it's hard to put into words.
That reminds me actually of a little bit of Rick Roderick. I forget which essay, but in one of those in one of his talks, in his lectures, he talks about how the drive to be healthy by people and how they'll spend their whole lives standing in a room running on a treadmill, but they'll live and how he would smoke every day and eat food and live to 60.
Yeah, it's a bit
Um,
better to be free to roam than on a hamster wheel and live long, right?
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, but it all kind of works until your body just does slow down that much more. And if I used to get terrible sore throat smoking all the time, which is why I stopped. But also, when you get older, you just can't handle many of those things, so it just gets less fun, really. So I'm sorry to say that. I don't know where that came from, but I mean, this all kind of works. It's all good and well when it's still kind of fun. There is this kind of celebration of life and death simultaneously, but the kind of the thing of like feeling that you're toying with death, you feel some level of control over it. So
you take agency away from
that's
death.
something of like having a death drive is like you're the one who's driving it. But it's just that isn't as much fun when you feel discernible effect on your body, through drink, drugs, smoking, whatever. I'm just kind of reflecting that's kind of a shame.
Yeah, and death drive becomes more passive. Watching TV, eating junk food.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but then and the thing
Less
is, I don't think that
brazen.
there's any less of a death drive present. Really, it's just that you don't have to do as much to get there.
Yeah, it sublimates into less obvious things, I guess. Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of happening anyway. There's a kind of a trade-off. So you don't have the crazy times, but you will therefore live a bit longer. And the longer you're living, the longer you're still kind of experiencing some kind of death drive. But it's channeled into different things that are maybe less obvious. I get, yeah.
Yeah, I started smoking because it's the only way I could get breaks at my first job. Just kind of the restaurant world. Like and maybe it's just because I was young and not brave enough to ask, but maybe I thought it would have been weird to just be like, "Hey, I'm gonna go stand outside for 5 minutes and like stare at the dumpster or whatever," like.
Yeah,
When
it
really,
was so
that sounds
normal.
beautiful.
It was so normal in the 90s still anyway. Like everyone in my family smoked. I got like 3 older brothers, a younger sister. She never smoked, but my dad, mum, anyone else related to family, friends, everyone, you just like get everyone in your house at once sometimes, because a lot of friends used to come down to my house in the evenings and just everyone would just be smoking, but it's like you could be 17, 16 and your dad would ask you for a cigarette or you'd ask him for one. It was all like that. It was just even then was just such a normal thing. I don't know why now we're just kind of reminiscing on smoking but it's interesting how quickly that changed, how quickly society kind of turned on that, through the ban in smoking in pubs, etc. It just became less sociable. I don't know if it's the same in America and Mexico.
Oh yeah, it is. We also have we also even have the labels, right, with the dead rats and the rotting lungs and rotting teeth.
Yeah, I mean, this gets into Zizek, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
In which we want danger without a danger.
We're even in the U.S. Or Hollywood or whatever has digitally taken cigarettes out of old classic movies now.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah, which is something else.
I remember that.
And in some of those scenes, it is kind of eerie because it's like clearly there's some, they should be doing something. Cigarette like had a placeholder in the shot, in the scene, kind of stuff up, but it's gone now. It just seems a little odd.
Yeah, I just finished watching all of Mad Men. I don't know if anyone's watched Mad Men, but it's incredible how much they smoke and drink there. It's just crazy watching it. It's just every scene at points just has like a whiskey bottle, someone pouring a drink. And that's interesting. But then at the end, like they turn against it, or Don has kind of like an awakening. He goes to this almost like this kibbutz, but a spiritual retreat is a better way of saying, basically a spiritual retreat. And the last thing he's doing this meditation with the Om kind of mantra. But then you see that from that he produces an advert, or it's implied that he was responsible for the Coca-Cola advert. I'd like to teach the world to sing. So you don't really know, but it's interesting how it turns on like levels of co-optation, but also maybe not co-optation, maybe things coexisting, capitalism with hippie style spiritualism. because of course a lot of the people from the hippie era did end up creating huge tech companies, which
Or
in a way
just
were responsible for
Whole
good
Foods.
things. They were responsible for good things, but also obviously bad things, because these companies, Apple, being a huge tech company, being a huge capitalist company, is responsible for bad shit, but obviously it's brought a lot of positive stuff creatively. But yeah, I mean, Don does go away from the death drive in the smoking, drinking kind of way. But I just thought that doing that meditation, that's almost courting death, no? Through nirvana, disappearing, becoming egoless, like ego death. So it is a kind of, how would you call it? A melding of the death drive, or kind of changing of its form.
Yeah, you're not like negating it, but you're accepting it that it's a natural part of your psyche, and like, making peace with that or whatever, I think that's a productive action.
Ernesto, what is it in Civilization and Its Discontent that Freud calls that? Is it a religion of prohibition?
I actually don't remember, Adam. Yeah, you're asking me. Yeah.
Okay, so sorry, I know he lays it out in Civilization and Its Discontent. Freud kind of talks about that, of different ways of approaching, and one of them would be like the Buddhist way of doing that, and it's religion of prohibition, but I could, so let's not get into that. I don't want to say something I'm wrong about.
No, it sounds accurate. He does describe different religions and how they affect their people, right?
Yeah,
I just don't remember, right, what he calls it.
Or religious asceticism.
But I think that it might be asceticism, and it sounds a bit like how Nietzsche describes. It sounds a bit like how Nietzsche describes Christianity, although he has a lot more time for Buddhism. Not that he actually discusses it very much. So I won't say he has more time for it, but he seems to be more positive about Buddhism. Yeah, I mean, actually, I think that's how the meditation strikes Western people, how they kind of interact with it. It's this kind of self-denial, but I don't really see that in these forms, as they're practiced in the East, from my understanding. But more than that, I think we need to wrap up, possibly bring this back to Fisher. If anyone wants to have a go. Adam, do you want to bring this back to Fisher and wrap up?
Yeah, I wanted to say that there's something strong in this book, especially that relates to acid communism essay and what we call psychedelic. Now, he doesn't say this specifically, but it seems to me that like the psychedelic reason is kind of purposeful invocation of weird or an eerie or an outside, which I think is what Mike was saying at the very beginning, that's like what he sees the way out Fisher is spelling here. So yeah, I just think that that's really interesting, and I know this is our now, but in a couple months we're going to come back and do the acid communism essay in just one go with some people, and that will be good. And this is definitely something I'll have in mind rereading it then, is trying to connect it to these concepts and the way that our subjectivity is able to be changed and shaped, and is already shaped, which is, realizing that is a psychedelic experience, realizing that you're not, this natural thing that's just there. There's already forces and strange multiplicities acting within and on you. And that's it. That's my thoughts.
Yeah, we will return with acid communism. It's not really part of this Fisher session. This is the end of the Fisher session. Though obviously it's going to be Fisher, but it's really the kind of bridge between the Fisher reading groups and a new group of reading groups on social class, probably beginning with Engels. So that will happen kind of late summer, I guess early autumn. So we'll take a bit of a break now for a few weeks, come back with acid communism as a kind of introduction to how we then move into class, because Fisher does talk about acid communism as kind of a way of awakening class consciousness. So there is this kind of logic there. So we look forward to having you back, viewers. And of course, we'll be happy to have Chris and Ernesto back. Thanks to One Time, who'll be happy to see back, who's been here for, I think he was here for he was here from the beginning of Ghost of My Life. And yeah, he's been here for Ghost of My Life and Weird and the Eerie. And so is Ernesto. So thank you to Ernesto. And we've also had here Epoch Philosophy for only one session, but he's of course welcome back later on. I'm sure we'll see him again somewhere on the acid left. Great, yeah. See you then.
Bye, everyone.
Solidarity.